it's certainly a lot more imposing than Belle ever was. Y'all knew what you were doing there. We opened with the blonde cousin of the Moscow clan. Yeah, I'm starting to think that Toy might have a low opinion of journalism. I don't blame him. This little reporter in particular had a weird Bucktooth design and a voice that didn't exactly match. I don't know, with a design like that, I think less Iori and more Richard Steven Horvitz.
Are you f***ing filming us right now?
And like any news these days, he put all of his effort into just the headline about the PPGZ, and not so much the actual contents of his articles, as this kid was no Peter Parker. Seriously, how does that guy get such good pictures of Spidey? Understandably, his classmates rejected his low-quality fluff piece, though Miyako appreciated how fluffy it was. As if anything, he did seem to at least be a genuine fan of the girls, having seen their escapades, specifically their first fight with Princess, likely because that was the best animated fight of this series so far. Wanting to get a proper good shot of the girls, he gave Miyako, as well as the rest of his class, his business card, revealing his name as Jesse Kido? To be fair, his hair does look a lot better than Miyuki's after a few decades. In exchange, they gave him some practical advice, I guess. Though more than effort, I think this kid needed some common sense. Then again, this is a world where giant pink hillbillies, living water molecules, and insane princesses with afros run around on a regular basis, so maybe he's just ahead of the curve. Fortunately, he did get some intel about the girls, and managed to catch them just as they were wrapping up another saving of the day. Miyako spotted him, and offered to let him take her picture. Well, sorry to tell you, kid, but you'll never make it as a modern journalist because you have actual integrity. But seriously, this is the moment that made this kid one of my favorite reporter characters ever, as while the girls in any form should be appreciated, Jesse recognized that these superheroines should be acknowledged for their good deeds above any superficial traits. It almost becomes a counterpoint to how the PPG license has been used and abused over the years, as well as certain other toy properties. Yeah, how are those makeup sales going? He did at least manage to take some significantly better photos of the girls than his previous ones, but they still weren't good enough for him. And in a nice moment for all of the girls, Momoko suggested that they could purposely let him take photos of them in action, but Miyako rejected this as she wanted to let him take genuine pictures of their heroism, to which Kaoru backed her. A good moment showing all of our heroines being forward-thinking in some way to support Jesse's goals. Unfortunately, they weren't the only forward thinkers, as Mojo had come up with a surprisingly good plan to try and snipe the girls as they were coming in to save the day. To do this, he once again seized the now complete tower from episode 5. And ironically, the whole idea for this plan originally came from Jesse's faraway photos of the girls, and said young reporter ended up becoming his hostage when he also went to the tower looking for the girls. However, this proved to be a big mistake, as this kid now became one of my favorite one-off characters of the show, as he managed to distract Mojo long enough for the girls to arrive. With that, they defeated Mojo, and in the process, Jesse was able to take a ton of photos for his paper. So yeah, wins all around, except for the fact that this kid couldn't frame a shot to save his life. Kid, go be Pokemon Snap and then we'll talk. The second half of the episode featured that one guy from As the Gods Will. Now, of course, I know what Dharma is, and how dangerous their game can be. Red light, green light will never be the same because of that and Squid Game. And yes, I like to watch Asian death games. Why do you ask? Anyway, the principal of the girls' school sent a photo of his afternoon snack cake to his brother, the mayor, mostly just to show off. In return, the mayor showed off his dessert, and the two had a rather infantile spat over whose food looked better. And thus were the humble beginnings of Instagram. And the two had one of the most boomer of boomer feuds before they were even really a thing back in 2006, and as a result, a new monster was born. Gee, imagine if Twitter were around back then, how horrifying of a monster that would be. Oh no wait, it was launched just a few months before this episode aired. Wow, y'all dodged a bullet there. Seriously, I just find it interesting how this episode, especially by the end, becomes a bit of a social commentary on modern social media and its toxicity that results in figurative and literal monsters like this guy. Also, the fact that we now connect several episodes' conflicts of this show from 2006 back to modern problems might be a sign that we're kind of going backwards a little bit, but I'm sure that's not the case at all now, is it? Anyway, this rejected electric Pokemon design began wreaking havoc, starting by devouring its creator's desserts, resolving that conflict, and then ringing everyone's phones. Now you see, this is why y'all have to put your phones on silent. You never know when electricity is going to gain sentience and start prank calling you. During all of this, Peach was unable to reach the girls, as, appropriately enough, they were outside the service range due to being in the subways at the time. They did eventually reach them, but by that time, a giant phone monster was destroying the city. Fun fact, some flip phones are considered to be much sturdier than some modern smartphones, as well as some useful little henshin devices. Man, I miss these things. Unable to overcome its outdated sturdiness, the girls turned their focus onto its creator, but since this monster was a literal bolt of lightning, keeping up with it was nigh impossible. However, in a clever little bit for our heroines, they noticed that being an electric wave monster, he seemed to be powered by phone signals, meaning that if he were to be cut off from them like they were in the subways, he'd become easy pickings. It was a very clever way of defeating this monster, utilizing plot elements that had been previously established in the episode, and even kind of covered for the show's usual lack of good fight animation. Before reverting the monster back to normal, they let him have a few words with its creators. As it turned out, their little sweets feud had been going on for a while, at least ever since the first episode of the series when the Dark Lights were originally released. And while the electric waves didn't immediately gain sentience, likely because they weren't a solid object, the brothers' endless spats did eventually become the basis for his personality, not unlike with Noodler and the ramen chef from a couple episodes ago. And just like that unfortunate bowl of noodles, he didn't want to be a monster filled with nothing but malice towards everything around him, because that just leads to an endless cycle of hatred and destruction, and yet he couldn't deny how he was created in the first place. It's honestly amazing how some of the one-off monsters of this show are not only more fleshed out than some recurring anime antagonists, but also pretty timeless. As I mentioned, this episode came out when Twitter was still in its infancy, so I don't think anyone could have predicted how that platform would become home to arguments even more pointless than who has the better dessert. I know I've used this clip before, but it bears repeating. The episode ended with the brothers agreeing to drop their stupid sweets feud, assuring the monster that they would never argue over the phone again. It didn't stop them from arguing in person, but at least this is healthier and doesn't result in the creation of any stupid hashtags. You know, in spite of the lower production values and kind of cliched stories, I've really gained a new appreciation for this show, if only because it highlights something that I think some people have forgotten. Common decency. And while I'm not advocating that we take a step backwards in our technology and completely drop social media altogether, I also don't think we should lose our ability to be courteous to others and force our viewpoints onto them. The fact that this episode featured stories about journalistic integrity and pay squabbles over the phone really seemed to predict what would be some of the main issues on Twitter. While certainly not the most fleshed out or interesting side character ever, Jesse was very likable, if only because he appreciated the girls for what they really were, superheroines who were meant to be pillars of morality. As a result, his story was enjoyable, as he wasn't at all annoying or unlikable, and even that last punchline was pretty hilarious. That said, I did kind of like the story of the electric wave monster a little more, as the antagonist was surprisingly sympathetic. It's clear they just wanted to be a means of connecting people together, and yet was forced to become an instrument of discourse between a couple of old men. And in hindsight, he kind of becomes an even more tragic monster considering the sort of landscape social media has become. As a result, while I think the original message of this was your basic people should get along lesson, this has also become a bit of a cautionary tale about our reliance on phones as our only means of communication, and how we should at least try to remain civil on them. This show really amazes me with how relevant it has become many years later, and while I won't pretend like this is a high quality production or anything, it has an undeniable heart to it. These messages about maintaining integrity and how to put the phones down definitely need to be heard now more than ever. As always, thank you for humoring an old man ranting at the clouds, as I do know I tend to overanalyze this stuff. Though if you are into overanalysis, do check out some of my other video essays like my Toy Trinity videos, as well as look forward to my future videos like the upcoming final part to my Gold Princess reviews. And until then though, farewell for now my friends, and didn't I say to get out of my house? Look, I live on my own, you're not gonna find any drama here.